Everyone, I'm delighted to introduce His Excellency Ayman. I have to read. I've been practicing your name all morning.
Don't worry about it, yeah.
Minister of Youth and Sports Affairs in Bahrain. His Excellency Ayman bin Tawfeeq Almoayed. I know I haven't pronounced that right, but I've tried.
You're doing well, you're doing well.
Thank you. We are here in Saudi. You've created great change in Bahrain, and I've actually spoken in Bahrain before and had a fantastic time in your country. What I really wanted to talk about today was what you've been doing there with the youth, not only on a business level, but on a nurturing level, because I know that that's a really important part of what you do. Yeah. And I know that post-COVID, in this quite crazy time, the youth need a little bit of extra nurturing, a little bit of extra guidance. So I really want to ask you, what's your goal there, and how have you been carrying out your vision?
So first of all, thank you for the opportunity, thank you for the invite. What we were doing and are still doing in Bahrain is what we call synthesizing hope. And the reason why we say synthesizing hope is because the focus, as far as we're concerned, is on the narrative and the narrative building. And the reason, again, why we do that, if somebody was to go one step deeper, is because, as far as we're concerned, this sort of narrative, this sort of perception, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so if people feel, or if our youth feel, that tomorrow is going to be a better day, it tends to play out that way.
Yes.
And if they feel that it's not, then it also tends to play out that way. And so from a diagnosis perspective, at the very beginning, what we did many years ago is that we tried to make sure that we're always on an upward trajectory. We heard His Excellency Faisal Ibrahim just now talking about transformation and the importance of faith. In Bahrain, we talk about hope and faith. Just believing that tomorrow is going to be a better day. And then once you have that, once you have your North Star, your due north, you know where you're going, then all of the programs tend to sort of build up to that. And so as far as startups are concerned, we need to make sure that everybody understands that they have access to capital, they have access to opportunity, they have access to liquidity, they have access to talent. As far as talent is concerned, again, they have access to opportunity. And we're continually managing the narrative, just continually shedding light on the positive aspects within the community, the positive aspects of the change that we're seeing, and so on. And it's amazing. It builds momentum. I mean, we see it on the ground in Bahrain. We see it here in Saudi Arabia. You can feel the buzz. We see it in the Emirates and in other places as well.
You can certainly feel the buzz. I came here in May, and I'll be returning in 10 days' time for a big film series with the Wall Street Journal, where they've kind of chosen me to be visiting Saudi through the eyes of a Londoner, Americaner. And you can really feel the buzz in the air. I traveled to Hail and saw some wall paintings. I've been in Jeddah, came back to Riyadh. Next, in December, I'll go to Middle East, the music festival, to film there, and Al Ula. And everywhere I go, everyone was so welcoming and so excited, and I really felt that it was infectious. Now, what I want to ask you is, when you're saying that you communicate with these people about what's on offer for them, how are you communicating with your youth?
Okay, so before that, we're talking about transformation.
Yeah.
Right? And so what you do with transformation is you need to know what your current state looks like and what your future state, what you want or project your future state to be. And then what you also need to do is we analyze every single step that we can take in 3 dimensions. Okay. So what we look at is, number 1, the amount of resources that we need for a given project. Number 2, the impact that project is going to give us. And then number 3, the current resistance. And it's an organic, natural, living document that we continue, so almost like a radar. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because when we're focusing on transformation, the amount of resistance tends to melt away if you start to build credibility. And it's exactly what we saw here in Saudi Arabia. I mean, what we saw here in Saudi Arabia, I had the distinct privilege to be here very early in 2018. In 2017, I saw it at the end of 2018 with the Formula E. I saw it before that with the first concert, with the Yanni concert. I then saw it with the build-up to the Formula One, and so on and so forth. And you would see it, at the very beginning, you can feel the resistance in the air, and then it just becomes a bit more natural. You start to build up traction, and by now, as you can look around and you can see, the resistance, well, there is no resistance, there's excitement to move forward. Everybody knows that tomorrow is going to be a better day. And so from our perspective, the way that we communicate it is as follows. Number one, we've got something that we call youth summits. So we make sure that our youth are there participating with our ministers in policy hackathons. And the beauty of it is that somebody would identify a problem, sit with ministers or a group of ministers, and you don't leave the room without an answer, okay? And it's brilliant because every little step counts. And you can almost palpably sort of feel the change in the attitude. So they come in being very cynical, rolling their eyes, and leave there looking around, trying to find the next problem, the next issue that they're going to be helping us with. And so that's number one. Number two, what we allow them to do is to sort of go out, to travel quite a bit. We're doing that just to broaden their horizon, and then come back and share their expertise with us. So each one of them is starting to become a core, has core expertise in a given field. And we're making sure in the end, we've got a dashboard, and it's almost an individual dashboard. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure or feel whether their perception is in the right direction, or it's in the direction that shows us that we're doing our job right. And so the questions that we ask are, do they feel safe, seen, supported, wanted, trusted, hopeful? And if the answers are yes, then we're doing the right thing.
And I think when you talk about resistance comes essentially from fear.
Yes.
And the opposite of fear is faith. And I think in time one gets more and more faith. But I also think fear is no bad thing, because it keeps you moving, it keeps you changing, it keeps you growing. I'd like to ask a little bit about you yourself. As you were a youth, how have you trained to become the man you are today? What's your training been? What's your trajectory been?
So historically, I mean, as far as academia is concerned, I studied law. I then set up a business, so I was an entrepreneur. Grew that business. I then moved into change management, where we would acquire businesses and turn them around, so grow them and turn them around. I then started to work with the stock exchange in working on listing companies and so on and so forth. But the underlying sort of theme with all of that is that my team has always been young, always, historically. It plays out that way. The team that we have has always been young. We've always relied on those guys, these talents that we have. For some reason, I just have an affinity for it, to be honest. And then from there, we went from changing businesses or growing businesses, merging businesses, acquiring businesses, to start in supporting policymakers. And that's sort of sucked me into the current role that I'm playing. And the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, to be very honest, is my assessment of my job. I call it the ripple. So it depends on the ripple effect. So early on, as a lawyer, you had a small ripple effect, and you could sort of support an individual. Supporting companies and institutions, slightly bigger ripple effect. Now in policy, we're very grateful to have the opportunity to make a change.
It's interesting, the ripple effect. I was talking about that with someone the other day, of how you think maybe something that you do can only impact maybe one or two people, but then that can impact them. There's a chain reaction.
No question.
And it's just to just to have the courage to make the change in the first place.
So when we talk about projects, we talk about the projects and the individuals that we want to support. And we try to make sure that these are high impact projects, but also high impact individuals. There's an example that I use constantly, and as far as I'm concerned, we call them the 1%. So the 1% are the high impact individuals that can lead a project that we're working on. And the example that we use is yeast, oddly, of all things. So we talk about baking bread, and so you'd put all the ingredients in, you'd put the ingredients, the collective, into an oven, but without the yeast, nothing rises. So you don't get that chemical reaction. And so what we're looking for are individuals that, yes, can perform, but more importantly, can turn a group into greater than the sum of their parts. And there's plenty of them. There really are plenty of them. You just need to find them. It's very exciting once you see that dynamic sort of start.
And what do you think some of the challenges are facing the youth of today? I mean, COVID really has been a difficult time for many different generations. Everyone suffered. What are some of the challenges you see that might make some people feel a little bit better in the room that they're struggling with?
Personally, I think it's dogma. And I'll tell you why I say that. When we're working on rules, for example, we're always, when we're talking about rules, when we're talking about education reform, when we're talking about judicial reform, when we're talking about access to capital and so on and so forth, we always need to understand as policymakers that we are always one step behind. And that's the reality everywhere, anywhere in the world. Policymakers are always one step behind. So for example, if you think about fintech, so fintech started, and then policymakers had to come in and try to figure it out, right? With social media, it started, and then we had to come in and figure it out. With cross-border trade, exactly the same. And so I think the largest, I would argue, that we have two big problems that youth, or two big challenges that youth deal with. Number one, policymakers not keeping up with the change that they need to see and the opportunities that are available. And then number two, them being taught by us things that are excellent for the old generation and not for the current generation. So as far as I'm concerned, I would much rather if we focused on skills that would help them in the future, as opposed to specializations that are backward looking. And I appreciate that those specializations are tried and tested and so on and so forth. But I doubt they would be helpful in the future. So my two bits that I like to focus on is policy and upskilling, to be honest.
And just before I was talking about the big idea, where do you get your big ideas from? Are you reading 20 newspapers a day and flicking through TikTok every minute of the day? Are you watching some specific news program? I'm sure we all want to know what's feeding you the information so that you can make these informed decisions.
So we've got a thing that we do called Chain of Whys. And so we sit with very young youth, even kids, and the question is just why? And it's brilliant because I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of a situation that we sat down and sort of delved into. The first question was with regards to notarization. So when you incorporate companies, for example, you need to notarize the document. You need to sit before an authority figure to be able to notarize it. And the question was, but why? Why do you need to be there? First point. Second point, why does it need to be documented? Because if the purpose is for you to document the interaction, video is better than a signature. All right? And if you are if you're recording it, then why not just do it electronically? Why not a Zoom call or whatever, and so on? And so we would do this constantly. But the truth of the matter is, what we ask kids to do is to highlight points of friction. And I call it points of annoyance. Because so if they were to flag the annoyance, and then we do the chain of whys on it, 9 out of 10 times, you'll find out that we're doing it because it's a legacy thing. This is how we always used to do it. And then you just, unwrap it.
Well, we have only 10 seconds left. That was an extremely quick conversation. I could have chat for a lot longer. Your Excellency, thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to chat. I hope we can speak some more.
Definitely.
And I look forward to getting I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they constantly ask me, why? Maybe I listen to them more.
Chain of whys. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.